Hey, Patrick, thank you so much for sending a video reply, man. It was so good to hear your voice and see your face. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to have any other kind of live conversations this term. Maybe the Zoom groups weren't a good fit for you or not a good time, but thanks for taking the time to record a video reply here in week 10. And I love here at the end how you have pulled together Romans 3, your favorite passage, I think you said, from Romans 21 to 31, pulled that into Romans 14 and shown the connection that um, the faith that Paul sort of extols in chapter 3, in that key dense passage, the faith of Jesus that I think is shared among people and sort of communicates that their life is a gift to one another, that they don't have authority over each other, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and the life together they have is a gift that God gives by the faith of Jesus that they share in, that this is then borne out, as you say, in the different measures of faith that people embody and exhibit around the table in chapter 14. And that Paul calls upon people to respect one another, respect their differences, to respect that Jesus is their judge, a merciful judge, as opposed to um, sort of playing at judge of one another. They can't even appeal to God's written word as something that would kind of decide these differences. They have to take into account the conscience of each other and how eating different food will play out in one another's lives. And that's what the life of faith is about. It is a certain mutuality, openness to one another, finally, the love of neighbor that the law of God commands, as Paul says there in chapter 13. I'm glad you highlighted the eschatological piece as well, that for Paul, the possibility of this life together is because the resurrection from the dead has begun, because the spirit of resurrection power is among the people baptized into Jesus. And this frees them to be able to lean into one another, to be patient with each other, to trust God enough that they can trust one another. And that is what gives them power to negotiate all kinds of otherwise possibly threatening differences. So great articulation of that. And then there's one other thing that I think I wanted to highlight. You heard in the podcast how I think it's conspicuous and noteworthy that Paul doesn't use the language of Jew and Greek or Jew and Gentile in Romans 14 to 15 and instead talks about those who are being weak in faith versus those who are powerful in faith. Only to say there in chapter 15 that if people think that they are powerful in faith, feel a sense of freedom to eat whatever they want, for example, then it's their responsibility to assume the burdens of those who are being weak in faith. So he kind of subverts any claim to power or strength by saying that what it means concretely is heightened responsibility for others rather than the ability to rule over others. Um, but all that said, I think it is still tempting for us to transpose that difference in faith onto the kind of Jew Gentile distinction, to regard those who are being weak in faith as probably Jews and those who are more powerful in faith as probably of Gentile background. And I want to offer two reasons for why I don't think that works. One, of course, is the familiar, probably kind of hobby horse of mine by this point in the course, that Paul repeatedly characterizes the audience of the letter as of Gentile background and also names that there's a great diversity in the audience, even as they all come from Gentile backgrounds. So I don't think that the weak and strong will map very well onto a Jew-Gentile distinction because I think Paul is writing to Gentile people. And so we're talking about Gentile people who are being weak in faith and Gentile people who are being more powerful in faith. Even as these people are all now being adopted into the family of Israel as Abraham's promised future. So that's one reason, is the audience of the letter being characterized by Paul as non-Jewish. But the other is what we read in a parallel passage in 1 Corinthians 8. And I think this is worth attending to because there's a similar issue going on in Corinth, with some people claiming more freedom than others, and Paul warning those who claim more freedom that that freedom should not be held over the head of others. And it's similar in freedom to eat whatever they want. And here's the key. There, Paul says that those who are claiming more freedom for themselves are those who do not have as long or recent a history in the pagan world, that despite coming from Gentile background, they've spent more time in this community in Corinth that is learning the ways of the God of Israel and serving Jesus as the Messiah. So the implication is that the people who are weaker, and I think this would apply also in Romans 14 and 15, are actually those who are more recently coming from a pagan life. So it's the people with less Jewish education that are weaker, and people with more Jewish education that I think are likely to be those who are more powerful in faith. So that's just another reason I think to kind of be careful about how we imagine who is being weak in faith and who's being powerful. So just food for thought. But again, appreciate your video and responses, not only this week, but really throughout the quarter, Patrick. I think you've just done really good week in and week out. I appreciate always careful attention to the secondary material and seeing where they differ from each other. You had a good criticism, I thought, of Elliot, for example, this week, and saying Stubbs actually does a better job at Elliot's project than Elliot does. I actually happen to agree with you on that one. So just appreciate the careful work all term. I hope the course has been rewarding for you, that you've learned a lot, and God willing, that we'll cross paths maybe in another course or in some other context in the future. So thanks again, Patrick, for your work this week and all term.